Hello, chillins, and welcome to Mr. Monster Man pilot episode. And in this episode, I'll be discussing my what I would like to call my first paranormal experience. So, let's begin. So, I was about I want to say 9 years old when this happened, and at the time, I was living in kind of like, if you've seen the show Courage the Cowardly Dog, you would. This is kind of what my neighborhood looked like, except the houses were a little closer together. But essentially, middle of nowhere, desert type town. So, um, it basically happened. I was in my backyard, and we had a couple of dogs. And at the time, this our neighbors also had dogs. They had like, I want to say 11 Dalmatians, but I think that might be an exaggeration. But they had a lot of dogs that like to bark with my dog. So the situation was that our dog Brutus was up against the fence, and he was communicating with the other dogs. You know how they like to chat and all those things. And he was barking a lot more than usual. And now Brutus was a type of dog that he's more friendly. He doesn't instigate fights, and these dogs that lived behind us really liked to just basically bark at him for the slightest thing. Like, it was really nothing. So they would bark, like, go yapping on the other side of the fence and just like chase him and stuff. He'd play along. He'd be like, oh yeah, they're just like, they want to talk to me. Yeah. I don't think he understood that they were actually like hated him. So he was barking, and after a while I was like, okay, you guys are really annoying. I was just kind of annoyed with how much they were barking that day. So I went and I walked over to the fence. Now, my older brother had set up these bamboo, like he had planted bamboo along the fence as kind of like a border. So kind of like a privacy type thing, because our neighbors lived super close behind us. Like, you could see into their backyard because the fences were like chain link instead of wooden or anything. You can see right through it into the neighbor's backyard. So of course it's like, it's a privacy thing. So there's like, the bamboo are really tall, because they're adult bamboo and they had grown for a while. So like, you can't really see what's on the other side. So my dog, well, he wasn't my dog, but like Brutus, he stopped barking, and I was like, all right, he's kind of, I guess he's done playing. Was kind of like my line of reasoning at the time. And the other dogs, they were kind of quiet as well, and I thought that they had gone back in. I was like, yes, awesome, they're quiet, it's nice. So I go back there, and my dog hasn't left the fence yet, which is a little bit weird. I thought he would have. I was calling him. I was like, hey Brutus, like, come on, let's go play. He didn't move, which is weird because he wasn't a very attentive dog, but you didn't have to scream at him for him to come to you. You know, like, he was pretty, like, relatively loyal. I went to the fence, and I kind of peeked through the bamboo, and oh my god, I saw the scariest thing at that age. Like, it was the strangest thing I've ever seen. So I want to call it Bigfoot, and that was what I called it for many years, at least like a majority of my life, like 16 years. That's what I like to call it. But now I'm not really so sure. Because it doesn't really fit the description, like, of your typical Bigfoot scenario, and the location where I'm at and what I read and everything, it doesn't really match. You don't really see Bigfoot. I mean, you do see Sasquatch in the areas where I lived, and I kind of, like, because used to live in the desert, very, like, low, dry area, kind of difficult for something like that to hide. So right now I'm kind of like, I'm not really sure if it was a Sasquatch or anything like that. But on to the story. I kind of peeked through the bamboo, and I looked around, and I didn't really see anything at first. I was like, "What you looking at?" Like to my dog, because he was just like something still. He didn't move at all, and I kind of looked, and in the yard was this tall thing, for lack of better words. It was about the same size as the bamboo, and those things like get 7 or 8 feet tall. It was pretty scary. And a long time after I tried to rationalize it, maybe it was my neighbor. My neighbor was a pretty tallish guy. But now that I think about it, it's the neighbor and this thing are very, the way that they look are very different. Because this thing was massive. It was the size of a giant man. I mean, it did have kind of a sort of humanoid body, but the head was the main thing, because it was the main thing that looked different and made me think that it's not a Sasquatch. There might be something else. Is that the head was like a dome shape. So like if you look at like how my hands are doing, like it kind of like the head was like this. I'm shaking because well it's cold, but it's kind of scary. But like it's like the head was like, kind of like a dome shape, and there was no narrowing where the neck should have been. And that was kind of strange because most of the silhouettes of Sasquatch and things that I've seen usually have some sort of place where the neck would be. This thing did not have a neck. It was really strange. Kind of like the head kind of just blended into the shoulders, which is really odd because you're kind of looking at this thing and like, where's the neck? And it was furry because I saw the silhouette. I didn't really see its face. I just saw like, because it was in the afternoon, and the other house just happened to be facing west, and looking at this thing, looking at me, was really strange because I could just see the silhouette. I couldn't see any facial features. I couldn't see anything, but I knew that it had fur because I saw kind of like the glint of like, when you press up something to light, if it has some sort of fuzziness or furriness to it, you can see it. This was kind of like wiry fur, like kind of a cross between really wiry hair, like wiry human hair, like a guy who has like a wiry beard, kind of like that hair, but like mixed with fur. It was that kind of combination because I could see like little, not patches, but places where there was less fur or whatever this like stuff was on this creature, and it was all over the head, all over like the side body, and it was really tall. The arms were like, they looked like tree logs. That's how big these things were. They were enormous. They were like, there wasn't too much definition or curvature like a human body, from what I remember. Very kind of almost stiff looking, almost like a tree, but I knew it wasn't a tree because it kind of moved, which is creepy. Because I was kind of looking at it and I was like, I only looked at it for a second, and I was like, this is not human. This is something that I was not supposed to look at. So I'm looking at this thing for like a second and taking in all those details, like the dome-shaped head and like all these things I just described, and I panicked and I ran back inside, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell any of my siblings. I was like, they're gonna laugh at me. They're like, because I recall, and I think this is the reason why I think it was Bigfoot, was that like my dad and my parents and like other people that I knew would talk about Bigfoot and say, oh, it's fake. And I was like, well, I saw Bigfoot, so I don't think it's fake anymore. So I was like, but parents think it's fake, so I'm not going to tell them because they'll just laugh at me. So the next day, I was like, I want to see this thing again, even though it's really scary. So I went outside, and this was kind of creepy, but on a different type of creepy. I didn't see the creature again, but I did see my neighbor. He was, and this is kind of why I, at first for a while, thought it was my neighbor, because they were similar size, but I noticed that my neighbor wasn't very furry. He was kind of like a, I don't know, like a regular, your average man amount of hair, I suppose. Because this thing, and he had a neck. So, like, he had a neck, he had curvature, he had a lot of these other things. These features that make him human. And it was kind of weird. And he was kind of looking at me weird. I was like a little kid, like 9 years old, and like he's looking at me and like he's smiling in a very lecherous way. So, um, creepy on a different type. So I was like, okay, come on, Brutus, we're getting out of here. I guess I'm not seeing Bigfoot again. Which I never saw it again, whatever it was, which is kind of sad because, you know, it's really interesting when you see those types of things, like in real life. You're like, wow. I mean, there's a lot more emotion that goes with it, but so later on, the story is important to me because not only was it my first interaction, like face to face, because I have had earlier interactions that were more like of the first kind, like aliens. I don't want to give too much because those are for later, but it was my first interaction with something non-human, from what I could tell. So I wanted to know more about these things. I wanted to know, is Bigfoot real? Are these things real? So I went to the local library, which by local I mean a half-hour drive because, again, we lived in the middle of nowhere. And I read up on stuff like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, all these things. I spent like hours in the library. My mom, like once a week, we'd go into town to get groceries or whatever, and then I would go and I would just read as much as I can, because I didn't have internet where I lived. So, I mean, I liked books more anyway. I didn't start using the internet profusely until I was like 12 or 13. But at that point, it sparked something in me, which was nothing had ever really done that before besides writing. So, I feel like it's an important story that has a lot to do with not who I am necessarily, but kind of feeling that there's more to this world than we think we know. And I've always kind of held that belief that there's more to this reality that meets the eye. And I think that's the big takeaway now, looking back on it, on my experiences. So, but yes, that is my tale of Bigfoot. Not really sure exactly what it was. I'm thinking now that it's more like probably an alien because someone would have mentioned something in that small of a town. There was no mention. And I mean, it could have been my imagination, but again, you never know. So that is my first paranormal encounter. Tune in next week for other interesting stories. Until then, see you later, chillins.